A chilling wind cuts through the plains as Maggie, a paralyzed old woman, sits trapped in her wheelchair, lost to solitude. Then a wild Mustang emerges, dark, untamed, its piercing eyes locking onto hers, stepping closer than any beast should dare. Savior or threat? Before continuing the story, tell me which city you're watching from. I want to know how far this video has come. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so I can send you exciting stories like this every day. Thank you. The wind howled across the plains, sharp and merciless, slicing through the brittle grass like a blade through forgotten dreams. It carried whispers of a life long buried, days of thundering hooves, wild laughter, and a freedom Maggie Sullivan could still taste on the edge of her tongue. Now at 78, she sat motionless on her weathered porch, her frail hands clutching the arms of a wheelchair that had become both prison and throne. Her eyes, clouded with years and regret, stared into the endless expanse of gold and dust stretching beyond her little house. The horizon shimmered, taunting her with its vastness, a cruel reminder of everything she'd lost. 20 years ago, the world had shattered. A car accident, metal twisting, glass exploding, a scream swallowed by silence, had stolen her legs, her horses, her soul. Once she'd been a rider of legend, her dark hair whipping in the wind as she galloped across these very plains, her mare's muscles rippling beneath her like a living storm. Crowds had watched in awe, their cheers echoing in her ears. Now those memories were ghosts, flickering in the photographs that lined her walls, yellowed and curling at the edges. The horses she'd loved were gone, sold or scattered, and the plains, her kingdom, had become a graveyard of what could have been. She was alone now, save for the weekly visits from her granddaughter Sophia, who brought groceries and fleeting warmth. The rest of the time, it was just Maggie and the wind, an endless duet of solitude. She'd grown used to it, or so she told herself. But deep down, beneath the numbness, a hunger gnawed at her, a yearning for something wild, something alive, something to pull her back from the abyss. That morning, the air was different, crisp, biting, electric. Maggie wheeled herself out to the porch as the sun crept over the horizon, painting the plains in streaks of orange and shadow. She pulled her shawl tighter, her breath fogging in the chill. The plains stretched before her, a sea of swaying grass, untouched by human hands. Wild Mustangs roamed out there, distant specks of freedom she could only watch from afar. They never came close. They were ghosts too, untamed and unreachable, mocking her with their grace. But then, she saw it. A shadow broke the horizon, not a trick of the light, not a memory playing cruel games with her mind. It was real. A lone Mustang, its dark coat gleaming like polished obsidian, stood at the edge of her property. Too close, far too close. Maggie's heart stuttered, a jolt of adrenaline surging through her veins. Wild horses didn't do this. They fled from humans, their instincts honed by centuries of survival. Yet this one stood there, motionless, its silhouette sharp against the rising sun. She gripped the wheelchair tighter, her knuckles whitening. "What are you?" she whispered, her voice trembling, lost in the wind. The Mustang didn't move, but its head turned slightly, ears twitching as if it heard her. Its eyes, dark, piercing, alive, locked onto hers across the distance. Maggie froze, her breath caught in her throat, a tangle of fear and wonder choking her. Was it a mirage? A ghost of her past come to haunt her? Or something else? Something dangerous? The horse took a step forward, then another. Its hooves crunched the dry grass, deliberate, cautious, yet unafraid. Maggie's pulse hammered in her ears. 20 feet, 15, 10. Closer than any wild creature had ever dared come. She could see it clearly now, the ripple of muscle beneath its sleek coat, the flare of its nostrils as it breathed in the morning air, the intensity in its gaze. It wasn't just looking at her, it was seeing her. "What do you want?" she murmured, louder this time, her voice cracking with a mix of awe and dread. The Mustang paused, its ears flicking forward as if weighing her words. For a moment, time stopped. The wind fell silent. The world shrank to just the two of them, Maggie bound and broken, and this wild thing, free and untamed, standing on the edge of her crumbling existence. Then, without warning, it turned. A flash of motion, hooves pounding, mane streaming like a black flame, and it was gone, bolting over the hill as swiftly as it had appeared. Dust swirled in its wake, settling slowly back to the earth. Maggie sat there, her hands shaking, her chest heaving. The plains were empty again, but the air buzzed with something new, something alive. She didn't move for a long time. The encounter replayed in her mind. The Mustang's eyes, its impossible nearness, the way it had seemed to know her. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't a memory. It was real, and it had shaken her to her core. For the first time in years, a spark flickered inside her, an ember of wonder, of fear, of something she couldn't name. She didn't know why it had come or if it would return, but deep down in the hollows of her battered heart, she felt it. Their story had only just begun. When Sophia arrived later that day, her arms laden with grocery bags, Maggie's voice trembled as she spoke. "A wild horse came to me," she said, her eyes distant, still lost in the moment. "Right here, on the edge of the porch." Sophia laughed softly, setting the bags down. "A horse, Grandma? Maybe you dozed off and dreamed it. You always did love those old riding stories." Maggie's lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't argue. Sophia wouldn't understand, not yet. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the plains, Maggie wheeled herself back to the porch. Her eyes scanned the darkening expanse, searching, waiting. The wind picked up again, colder now, whispering secrets she couldn't decipher. Somewhere out there, the Mustang was running free, and somewhere inside her, a door long locked had creaked open. Just a crack, but enough to let the wild back in. The plains lay silent under the shroud of night, but Maggie couldn't sleep. The wind rattled the loose shutters of her little house, a restless song that mirrored the storm brewing inside her. She sat by the window, her wheelchair creaking faintly, her eyes fixed on the black expanse beyond the glass. The Mustang's visit replayed in her mind, those piercing eyes, that impossible nearness, the way it had vanished like smoke on the wind. It had torn something open in her, a wound she'd spent decades stitching shut. Freedom, loss, longing. They swirled together, sharp and raw, clawing at the edges of her heart. Dawn broke slowly, spilling pale light across the plains. Maggie wheeled herself back to the porch, her breath fogging in the crisp air. She didn't know why she was out there. Not really. Habit, maybe, or hope. Her hands trembled as she gripped the shawl around her shoulders, her gaze sweeping the horizon. The grass swayed, gold and endless, but empty. No shadow, no hooves, just the wind, mocking her with its hollow howl. She clenched her jaw, fighting the ache in her chest. "Foolish old woman," she muttered. It was nothing, just a stray. But then, she heard it, a faint thud, rhythmic, growing louder. Her heart lurched. She turned her head, squinting against the rising sun, and there it was, the Mustang, the same dark coat, the same unyielding gaze. It emerged from the haze, stepping deliberately across the plains, closer than before. Maggie's breath hitched. It wasn't running this time. It was coming to her. 10 feet, 5. It stopped just beyond the porch, its nostrils flaring, steam curling from its breath in the cold morning air. "You're back," she whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and wonder. The Mustang's ears flicked forward, as if it understood. She reached out instinctively, her hands shaking, frail fingers hovering in the space between them. It didn't bolt. It didn't flinch. Instead, it lowered its head slightly, studying her with those deep, knowing eyes. Maggie's throat tightened. She saw something in them. Wildness, yes, but also a flicker of something broken, something lost, like her. "I'll call you Thunder," she said softly, the name slipping out unbidden. It felt right, that sleek, dark form, blending with the dusk, slipping in and out of her world like a phantom. Thunder snorted, a low rumbling sound, and took a step closer. The porch creaked under the weight of the moment. Maggie's heart pounded. She hadn't felt this alive in years, not since the accident, not since the world had caged her. But this creature, this wild thing, saw her. Not the wheelchair, not the wrinkles or the frailty, just her. The spell broke when a truck rumbled in the distance. Thunder's head snapped up, ears swiveling, body tensing. Maggie followed its gaze. Dust kicked up along the dirt road leading to her house. Thomas's truck, unmistakable with its dented fender and growling engine. Her stomach twisted. Thomas was a rancher, gruff and practical, a man who saw the plains as a battlefield between man and beast. She knew what he'd say before he even stepped out. "Maggie!" His voice boomed as he slammed the truck door. Boots crunching gravel. Thunder bolted, hooves thundering as he vanished over the hill. Maggie's hand dropped, her chest hollow. Thomas strode up, his hat shadowing his weathered face. "Saw that damn Mustang again. Too close to my cattle this time. Spooked him half to death." "It's not hurting anyone," Maggie said, her voice steadier than she felt. "It's just, curious." "Curious?" Thomas barked a laugh, sharp and bitter. "Wild horses don't get curious, Maggie. They get dangerous. If it keeps coming round here, someone's gonna put a bullet in it. Mark my words." He tipped his hat, a warning more than a goodbye, and climbed back into his truck. The engine roared as he drove off, leaving a cloud of dust and dread in his wake. Maggie's hands clenched into fists. She wouldn't let that happen. Not to Thunder, not to the one thing that had woken her from this half-life. But doubt gnawed at her. What could she do? An old woman, trapped in a chair against a town that saw Mustangs as pests, or worse, trophies? Sophia arrived that afternoon, her cheerful chatter a stark contrast to the storm in Maggie's mind. "Brought you some soup, Grandma," she said, setting a pot on the stove. "You look pale. Everything okay?" Maggie hesitated, then spoke. "It came back, Sophia. The Mustang. Right up to the porch." Sophia paused, spoon in hand, her smile fading. "Again? Grandma, are you sure? Wild horses don't just hang around people. Maybe it's a stray from some ranch." "It's not a stray," Maggie snapped, sharper than she meant. "It's wild, I can feel it. And it's not afraid of me." Sophia sighed, crouching beside her. "I'm just worried, okay? You're out here alone, dreaming up stories. What if it's sick or dangerous? Thomas has been griping about Mustangs spooking his herd. He's not the only one who'd rather see him gone." Maggie's eyes flashed. "It's not a story, it's real, and it's mine." The words surprised her, fierce and possessive. Sophia blinked, taken aback, but said nothing more. She left soon after, her parting glance heavy with skepticism. That night, Maggie sat on the porch again, the darkness pressing in. The wind carried a chill that seeped into her bones, but she didn't care. She waited. Hours passed, the stars cold and distant above. Just as she turned to wheel inside, a sound, soft, deliberate, stopped her. Hooves. She held her breath, peering into the night. Thunder emerged, a black silhouette against the silvered grass, closer than ever. He stopped at the porch's edge, his breath warm against her outstretched hand. "You're trouble, aren't you?" she murmured, a faint smile tugging at her lips. Thunder nickered, low and gentle, and stayed. He grazed nearby, keeping her in his sight, a silent promise in the dark. Maggie's heart swelled, tears pricking her eyes. She wasn't alone anymore. But as the night deepened, Thomas's words echoed in her mind. Someone's gonna put a bullet in it. Fear coiled tight around her joy. Thunder was hers now, her lifeline, her wild heart, and she'd fight for him, even if it meant facing the world she'd long turned her back on. The air thickened as the days passed, heavy with the scent of rain and something darker. Trouble brewing on the horizon. Maggie felt it in her bones, an ache deeper than the cold could explain. Thunder came every night now, a silent ritual. He'd appear from the dark, his hooves whispering against the grass, and linger near the porch. She'd talk to him, soft words, old stories of galloping through the plains, her voice a lifeline stretching across the years. He'd listen, ears twitching, grazing close enough for her to feel his warmth. It was theirs, this fragile bond, a tether pulling her back from the edge. But the world wasn't kind to fragile things. That morning, the sky turned ugly. Black clouds rolled in, swallowing the sun, casting the plains in a sickly gray. Maggie wheeled herself out, her shawl flapping in the rising wind. No thunder. The horizon was empty, the grass trembling under the storm's shadow. Her stomach nodded. He'd never missed a dawn. "Where are you, boy?" she murmured, scanning the distance. The wind answered with a low growl, tugging at her hair, her hope. By noon, the storm hit. Thunder cracked, sharp and vicious, shaking the house. Rain lashed the windows, a torrent that blurred the world beyond. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the plains in jagged flashes. Maggie sat inside, her hands gripping the wheelchair, her heart racing. Thunder was out there, alone, exposed. She pictured him running, mane streaming, hooves pounding against the chaos. Or worse, trapped, hurt, lost. She couldn't sit still. She couldn't breathe. "Not you," she whispered, pressing a trembling hand to the glass. "Not you too." The hours dragged, each one a knife twisting deeper. Night fell, but the storm didn't relent. Wind screamed through the cracks, rattling the walls. Maggie stayed by the window, eyes burning, refusing to blink. She'd lost too much already. Her legs, her horses, her freedom. She wouldn't lose him, not Thunder. The clock ticked past midnight. The rain pounded. Her chest tightened, fear clawing at her throat. Then, a sound, faint, muffled by the gale. Hooves. She shoved the door open, rain soaking her instantly. "Thunder!" she called, voice raw, swallowed by the storm. Lightning flashed, and she saw him, staggering across the yard, a dark shape against the chaos. He was limping, his proud gait broken, his coat matted with mud and water. Maggie's heart stopped. "Over here!" she yelled, pushing her wheelchair forward, wheels slipping on the wet porch. He heard her, his ears flicked up, and he hobbled closer, each step a struggle. He reached the porch, collapsing against the railing. Maggie wheeled to his side, rain streaming down her face. "Oh, Thunder!" she gasped. Blood streaked his front leg, a deep gash oozing red into the mud. Debris from the storm, jagged wood, maybe metal, had torn into him. He shuddered, breath ragged, eyes wide with pain. She reached out, fingers brushing his soaked mane. He flinched but didn't pull away. "You're hurt," she whispered, tears mixing with the rain. "I've got you." She didn't think. She acted. Wheeling inside, she grabbed a towel, antiseptic, anything she could reach. Back on the porch, she worked fast. Rain hammered down. Wind roared. She pressed the towel to his wound, blood soaking through, staining her hands. "Stay still, boy," she said, voice shaking. Thunder trembled, but he trusted her, stood there, letting her clean the gash, her frail hands steady despite the chaos. Thunder boomed, lightning flared. She poured antiseptic, wincing as he snorted in pain. "I know," she murmured. "I know it hurts." Headlights cut through the storm. A truck screeched to a stop. Thomas's. Maggie froze, towel dripping red. He stormed up, rain slicking his coat, face grim. "What the hell's this, Maggie?" he shouted over the wind. "That damn horse again? Look at it, bleeding all over your porch." "He's hurt," she snapped, wheeling between him and Thunder. "He came to me." "He's trouble," Thomas yelled, stepping closer. Thunder flinched, stumbling back, leg buckling. "It's spooked my cattle twice this week. County's hearing complaints. They'll round it up, or worse, if it keeps this up." "He's not yours to judge," Maggie's voice cracked, fierce and desperate. "He's mine." Thomas's eyes narrowed. "You can't save it, Maggie. Wild things don't belong here. You're just making it worse." He turned, boots splashing mud, and climbed back into his truck. The engine growled as he peeled away, leaving her alone with the storm and her fear. Maggie looked at Thunder, his dark eyes locked on hers, trusting, pleading. She pressed the towel harder, blood seeping through her fingers. "I won't let them take you," she vowed, her voice a growl against the wind. The storm raged on, relentless, but she stayed. Hours bled into dawn. The rain eased, leaving the plains a glistening wreck. Thunder stood, shaky but alive, his wound clotting under her care. She slumped in her chair, soaked, exhausted, her hands red with his blood. But it wasn't over. Thomas's words hung heavy. They'll round it up. Or worse. The town wouldn't wait. Thunder's leg would heal, but time wouldn't. Maggie's jaw tightened. She'd fought the storm for him. Now she'd fight the world. She didn't know how, didn't know if she could. But as Thunder nudged her hand, warm breath against her skin, she knew one thing. She'd die before she let him go. The dawn after the storm broke cold and quiet, the plains glistening with the wreckage of rain. Maggie sat on her porch, her hands still stained with Thunder's blood, her wheelchair creaking under the weight of exhaustion. He stood nearby, his injured leg trembling but holding, his dark coat streaked with mud. She'd saved him from the storm, cleaned his wound, kept him alive through the night. But the victory felt hollow. Thomas's words echoed in her skull, relentless as the wind. They'll round it up, or worse. She clenched her fists, nails digging into her palms. Not if she could help it. Thunder nudged her hand, his warm breath a fleeting comfort. She stroked his mane, fingers tracing the strength beneath the filth. "You're a fighter, aren't you?" she whispered, her voice thick. "So am I." But doubt gnawed at her. She was 78, bound to a chair, her body a shadow of the rider she'd been. The town didn't care about her bond with a wild horse. To them, Thunder was a nuisance, a threat to cattle and order. She saw it in Thomas's eyes. Pity, impatience, a warning she couldn't ignore. Days blurred into a tense rhythm. Thunder healed slowly, his limp easing with each sunrise. Maggie tended him. Fresh water, hay she dragged from the shed, her frail arms shaking with effort. He trusted her now, letting her touch his wound, his neck, his proud face. Each moment stitched them closer, a bond forged in blood and defiance. But the plains weren't safe anymore. Trucks rumbled past more often, their engines growling threats. Whispers reached her, neighbors complaining, the county planning a roundup. Time was slipping through her fingers. Sophia arrived midweek, her face tight with worry. "Grandma, you look like you haven't slept," she said, setting groceries on the table. Her eyes flicked to the porch where Thunder grazed. "He's still here?" "He's hurt," Maggie said, her tone sharp. "He needs me." Sophia knelt beside her, voice soft but firm. "Thomas stopped by my place, said the county's coming next week. They've got reports of a Mustang causing trouble. They'll take him, Grandma. Put him in a pen or..." She trailed off, but the unspoken hung heavy. "Or kill him." Maggie's chest tightened. "They can't have him." "They will," Sophia pressed. "You can't stop them. Not alone." The words cut deep, but Maggie's jaw set. "Then help me." Sophia blinked, startled. "What?" "Help me save him," Maggie said, her eyes blazing. "He's not just some horse. He's mine. He brought me back, Sophia. I won't let them take that away." Sophia hesitated, then nodded. "Okay, but we need a plan." The next day, Sophia returned with news. "There's a sanctuary 2 towns over. Open land. Mustangs live free there. They'll take him if we can get him there." Hope flared in Maggie's chest, fragile but fierce. But moving a wild horse wasn't simple. Thunder trusted her, not trailers, not strangers. And time was short. Thomas's truck rolled by again that afternoon, his glare a promise of trouble. "We've got to move fast," Sophia said, pulling out her phone. She called the sanctuary, arranged a trailer, enlisted a vet. Maggie spent hours with Thunder, whispering to him, preparing him. "You're going somewhere safe," she told him, her hand on his neck. "I promise." His ears flicked, uncertain, but he stayed close. She memorized him, the curve of his muzzle, the wild spark in his eyes. She'd lose him soon, and the thought clawed at her heart. The day came too fast. Dust rose as the trailer pulled up. The vet, a quiet woman with steady hands, stepping out. Thunder tensed, nostrils flaring, sensing the shift. Maggie wheeled to his side, her voice calm despite the storm inside. "It's okay, boy, trust me." Sophia and the vet moved slowly, guiding him with ropes and patience. He balked, hooves stomping, eyes wild. Maggie's heart pounded. "Thunder, please," she begged, reaching out. He met her gaze, hesitated, then stepped forward, one shaky step, then another, into the trailer. The door slammed shut. A heavy thud. Thunder's panicked snort echoed inside. Maggie's hand dropped, tears spilling hot down her cheeks. "I'm sorry," she whispered, barely audible over the engine's roar. The trailer pulled away, dust swirling, taking him over the hill. She sat there alone, the plains stretching empty before her. Her chest ached, a hollow carved out where Thunder had been. She'd fought against the storm, the town, her own limits. But this felt like surrender. Sophia stayed, her hand on Maggie's shoulder. "He'll be safe there, Grandma. It's what you wanted." Maggie nodded, but the words didn't reach her. Safe, yes, but gone. She'd saved him, given him a chance at freedom, but the cost was a piece of herself she hadn't known she could still lose. The porch felt too big, the plains too quiet. She'd faced the world for him, Thomas, the county, the storm, and won. So why did it feel like defeat? That night she didn't sleep. She sat by the window, staring into the dark, imagining Thunder in a trailer, then a pasture running free. Did he hate her for this? Did he understand? The wind howled, carrying no answers. She'd fought her final fight, but the war wasn't over. Not yet. She'd see him again. She had to, if only to know he forgave her. The days after Thunder's departure stretched long and hollow, the plains a silent witness to Maggie's unraveling. She sat on her porch each morning, her wheelchair a cold anchor, her eyes tracing the horizon where the trailer had vanished. The wind blew softer now, carrying no hoofbeats, no whispers of the wild. Her hands, still rough from tending his wounds, lay idle in her lap. She'd saved him, ripped him from the jaws of the county's roundup, from Thomas's threats. But the silence he left behind was a wound that wouldn't heal. She'd fought for his freedom, but what had she lost in return? Sophia called that first evening, her voice bright through the phone. "He's settling in, Grandma. The sanctuary says he's already exploring the hills." Maggie forced a smile Sophia couldn't see. "Good," she said, her throat tight. "That's good." But the words tasted like ash. Safe wasn't enough. She needed to know he was still hers, that their bond hadn't broken in that trailer's metal cage. Sleep eluded her, the night filled with echoes. His panicked snort, the thud of the door, her own whispered apology. A week crept by, each day heavier than the last. The plains mocked her, vast and empty, a mirror to the hole in her chest. Then Sophia arrived, her eyes sparkling with something new. "The sanctuary invited us," she said, helping Maggie into her coat. "They want you to see him." Maggie's heart jolted, a spark piercing the fog. "When?" she asked, voice trembling. "This weekend," Sophia replied, already packing the wheelchair. The promise of Thunder pulled her forward, a lifeline she clutched with both hands. The drive was a blur, hours of rolling hills, Sophia's chatter fading into white noise. Maggie stared out the window, her mind racing. Would he remember her? Would he forgive her? The sanctuary emerged from the valley, a sprawl of green pastures framed by distant mountains. Mustangs dotted the fields, their manes catching the wind, but Maggie's eyes hunted for one, dark as night, wild as her dreams. A staff member greeted them, her smile warm. "He's doing well," she said, leading them to a fence. "A real leader out there." Then she saw him. Thunder stood near the edge, his coat gleaming in the sun, his limp gone. He was whole again, proud, his head high as he surveyed the herd. Maggie's breath caught, tears welling fast. "Thunder," she called, soft as a prayer. He froze, ears swiveling. For a heartbeat, he didn't move. Then he turned, his dark eyes finding hers across the distance. Time slowed. He walked toward her, slow, deliberate, each step a question answered. Maggie wheeled closer, her hand outstretched, trembling. He reached the fence. His muzzle brushed her palm, warm and soft, the same trust she'd earned in the storm. Tears spilled down her cheeks, a sob breaking free. "You remember me," she whispered, her voice cracking. Thunder nickered, low and gentle, pressing closer. She stroked his neck, feeling the strength she'd fought for, the wildness she'd saved. "I'm sorry," she said, the words spilling out. "I had to let you go." His eyes held hers, steady, unblinking. No blame, just understanding. The staff member watched, smiling. "He's thriving here. leads the others like he owns the place. But he's different with you. Maggie nodded, her heart swelling. She spent hours there talking to him, old stories, quiet promises, her voice weaving their bond anew. When the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the pasture, she knew it was time. "Be happy, Thunder," she said, her hand lingering on his muzzle. "You've got my heart out there with you." He stepped back, watching her, then turned and trotted off, his gait strong, free. The ride home was quiet, the car filled with a stillness that wasn't empty. Sophia glanced at her. "You okay, Grandma?" Maggie smiled, faint but real. "I am now." She'd seen him, felt him, knew he was where he belonged, but the ache remained, a tender bruise she'd carry forever. Back on her porch, the plains stretched gold under the fading light. She didn't wait for him anymore. She didn't need to. He was out there, running, leading, alive. Weeks later, Sophia brought news. Thunder's legend growing at the sanctuary, the herd following his fearless stride. Maggie listened, pride mingling with loss. She started writing, her journal filling with their story, every moment etched in ink. Neighbors came by, drawn by the tale. Even Thomas, his gruff voice softer now. "Guess you proved me wrong," he said, tipping his hat. She smiled. "He taught me to fight." One crisp morning, she sat outside, the wind rustling the grass. She closed her eyes, imagining his hooves pounding the earth, his mane streaming free. "Thank you, Thunder," she whispered, the words drifting into the air. The plains answered with silence, but it wasn't empty. It held an echo of courage, of connection, of a wild heart that had pulled her back to life. She didn't know if he heard her, didn't know if he'd ever return in dreams or dust. But as the sun rose, painting the world anew, she felt it. He was still with her, somewhere beyond the horizon, running forever wild. From a lonely woman trapped in a wheelchair, Maggie found light in the darkness through Thunder, a wild spirit who reawakened her heart and reminded her that freedom isn't just about movement, but about how we choose to live and connect with the world. Though they parted ways, their bond endures, echoing across the plains like an endless song of hope. We all have a Thunder out there, something unexpected, fierce, and life-changing, waiting to find us. If this story touched your soul, if you crave more inspiring journeys like this, then subscribe to our YouTube channel today. Hit that subscribe button, ring the bell, and join us as we uncover more incredible stories waiting to be told.